Hello and welcome to this Campus TV news discussion show. My name's Danny Archer, and with less than 3 weeks to go until the general election, today we're going to have an election special. We're going to cover the local election here in Bath, where the Liberal Democrats' majority could come under some pressure by the Conservatives, and the general election itself. Will it be David Cameron or Ed Miliband who will walk into number 10? I'm joined this week by Ben Butcher, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Bath Impact, Liv Hows, the Student Media General Election Coordinator, and Alex Mulchrone, Chair of the Politics Society. So throughout the local elections here in Bath, we've been having a load of hustings, which these three guests have all been involved in, and a big debate which happened last Thursday. So Ben, I'll come to you first. Who's impressed you during the hustings and the big debate?
I think when you saw the big debate, there was one clear winner for me, which was Steve Bradley, Liberal Democrat candidate. I think the amount of money and the amount of time that's going behind his campaign is very important, because this seat for the Liberal Democrats is probably one of the most important seats in the country. It's one of the seats which they may actually not lose. And so he's really had a lot of pressure, and I think that he's delivered when it came to the student hustings. And I think that what he really did show is that he understood student issues and what is important to us in Bath.
Liv, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall when I think about all the hustings and the big debate, I would say that he comes out on top. But I do think that I think by nature of being a Liberal Democrat, some of his policies instinctively appeal more to some students. But I do think that there were some moments in the big debate where he got quite personal. It was quite negative campaigning, and personally, that's not something that appeals to me within a politician. But I think overall, he definitely presented himself the best.
Alex, Liberal Democrats as well?
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think Ben Howlett of the Conservatives has been the only credible challenger. He's been a respectable candidate, and I could see him as an MP one day. Ollie Middleton of Labour and Julian Deverill of UKIP. I got the feeling they were there to make up the numbers when they know that they're chasing a pointless seat. But yeah, I'd agree. I'd say Steve and Ben seem the most credible candidates.
So obviously the Liberal Democrats have 25.2% majority here, held by John Foster, who is now retiring. So it will be Steve who takes on the role. I mean, out of all the other people who are in the debate, Julian Deverill made a lot of criticism early on in his hustling and then in the big debate again. Is it just UKIP? You know, is there anything you do about that, or is it because of the negative vibes for UKIP throughout the national and the local level?
My gut tells me Julian Deverill is how UKIP want all their candidates to be. He's an old school libertarian Thatcherite, basically. He's not racist, from what I could tell, and he's not xenophobic. So he was there to make the pitch for small government. Obviously, UKIP are not going to have a friendly audience in a university, packed full of foreign students, and students who tend to be a bit more open, a bit more left-wing in outlook, I'd say.
I mean, I think that's something that is interesting, is the idea that Julian Deverill does really represent what UKIP want to be. And I met him last year at the for Bath Impact for an interview. And I did meet him. He's a very likeable guy. And I think that actually, as UKIP develops, if, for example, Nigel Farage loses his seat, which he's running for, and he steps down, it's that kind of figures who might actually be quite promising for the party. Sitting in front of a student audience, never going to be popular. A lot of the ideas which he's pushing forward aren't going to be popular, but that's the audience he had at the time. I would be interested to see him standing in front of a more friendly audience, maybe in Twerton or something like that, where has got a little bit of support.
Liv, you go with that?
I think the main problem for Julian Deverill was that he doesn't really, he openly said that he doesn't believe in climate change.
Yeah.
And in an environment such as a University of Bath, where a strong majority of students are scientists or involved with science in some way, that's obviously not going to be met in any circumstance with a good reception. And so he was off on a bad foot from that, from the beginning. I think as a politician in himself, like you said, he's definitely sort of the friendly face of the party, as it were. And I think Nigel Farage, if Julian was running in a more prominent seat that UKIP had a better chance of winning, I suspect that Farage would be here every other day pushing Deverill as a candidate. But I think it's unfortunate that he's running in Bath. And he himself has said that he doesn't have that much background in Bath, which compared to people like Steve Bradley, who was student union president here, people like Ben Howlett, who's lived here for quite a long time, he doesn't come from the same local sort of perspective.
But he is also a local business owner in Bath, which is something which, again, I think there is that element which maybe Steve Bradley and Ben Howlett don't necessarily have, is that, I think there is an element of them being here for the politics as opposed to Julian here for the business, and the same with a couple of other candidates as well.
He opened his hustings by saying, "I wish I didn't have to do this." You know, the feeling I got off Julian was he was standing for Parliament out of a sense of duty, a sense to drag Britain kicking and screaming from the European Union.
He's a man who thinks that Britain's lost a little bit of almost common sense. That's the word he loved using when I was talking to him, was common sense. And he just says little things like, rather than people phoning up the council when there's noise complaints with students, why don't they just go knock on the door, things like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what he's talking about when he says, I need to do this. And I think that's a kind of a big UKIP mentality. Some of it comes from a bad place. Some of it does maybe perhaps come from a good place.
So why don't we then go back to Liberal Democrats now? If Bath did turn blue, you know, you've already said that the majority they've got here, they should be able to hold to this seat. But it is a really vital seat for the Liberal Democrats, isn't it, here in Bath?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's predicted that they're going to go to something like 23 seats, down from 60. They're going to lose about 2/3 of their seats if polls are correct. In Bath, it is a symbolic seat. It's an important seat. It's a good seat. It looks good when you say that your party has that seat. And the problem is with Steve Bradley is that he's jumping off the personality of Don Foster. He's a very popular local figure. Steve Bradley is, again, he's a very charismatic person, as we saw in the debates. But he is launching off that. So that's the thing which I think might tip it towards blue. But it is an important seat. And if I think on election night, if Bath gets called early and they lose Bath, it's going to be an awful night for the Liberal Democrats.
Alex, is there a likelihood they could lose Bath?
There's a likelihood, but I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, their majority is currently around 12,000. It'll probably be whittled to 2,000 or 3,000. They're going to lose significant chunks of the student vote. You know, most people simply associate the Lib Dems in government with the fee scandal. And they've definitely lost voters to the Conservatives on the right and the Greens on the left. But they've got a really effective party machine, local support, and a popular incumbent, which does help. So it'll strain their majority, but I don't think Bath's going to turn blue.
You're good at that, Liv.
I think the Greens are not going to win this seat, and I think the greatest contesters are still the Conservatives. But from a student perspective, the greatest threat to Lib Dems is the Green Party. I mean, the number of Green Party activists on campus, on social media, is huge. I mean, I would say that even if it's not huge, they have a lot of, FaceTime, and they are around. But I think it's still going to stay Lib Dem. I think the Conservatives.
It's interesting you say about the Green threat to the student vote, because we did the Bath Impact Survey a few months ago. We had 500 students, and it was about 23% Conservative, 25% Green. So Greens were ahead there. But there was a report, at least yesterday, by High Flyers. It's looked at students and how they're going to vote across the country. And in Bath, it actually put the Conservatives up to 43% to the Greens 25%. I think that's interesting, because there's this idea that Liberal Democrats have lost the student vote. And I think that is their worst nightmare, that rather than going to the left, they go to the right and vote for Conservative as opposed to maybe the Greens or Labour.
I think there's a consensus around student voters on the left, no matter whether they vote for Lib Dems or Green, that the worst case scenario would be to lose the seat to the Tories. And that counts for the National as well. I think voters who are voting for Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, SNP in Scotland as well, are united by their fear of a Conservative majority.
I also think the problem here in Bath is interesting you saying that the proportion of students would vote for, and in Bath, Tories over Greens, is I think here, I would say maybe as students are more inclined to be centre and slightly left of centre, but I think with issues such as the job market, which a lot of people, for better or for worse, associate with immigration, I do think that they would maybe just go for that purely on the basis that they're looking at their long-term future.
And that's been a very successful narrative of the Conservative campaign, is constantly saying that we have a plan, Labour and the others don't. And I think that's something that's really worked, and actually even worked with students, which is maybe a little bit surprising to some. But I think in Bath it's interesting to see that the split has gone towards Conservatives, away from Liberal Democrats. But I don't know how big of a part that plays in this constituency.
It's just about the tuition fees? Is that the big thing? If you're a normal student here, would you say, I can't vote the Liberal Democrats because of what they did to us?
And I think that is, again, another very successful narrative that the Liberal Democrats kind of handed over tuition fees. It's a lot more complicated than that. But the idea being, and I think that's one of the big ideas, but also the idea that they simply worked with the Conservatives. And I think that's been quite unpopular in general with all of the cuts that have gone on. That's now been associated with Liberal Democrats as well as Conservatives.
But Sorry.
No, well, I mean, the one thing that most people remember, especially students, about the Lib Dems' time in government is the tuition fees hike, which they see the Lib Dems as implicit in. But then I would just say as well, the stereotype that all students are these wide-eyed, liberal, left-wing voters is in the past. The Conservative bloc is the biggest chunk of students. So looking forward to 2020, 2025, I actually think Bath is only going to get more likely to vote Conservative.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the other problem is that Conservatives themselves have been pushing this whole rhetoric of long-term economic plan, hard-working people. Their focus is very much on the economy, jobs, and that appeals to students because they're about to leave university into a very uncertain job market. And okay, Liberal Democrats talk of things like minimum tax barrier and things like that, and which is important. But students like to think that maybe they'd be working in jobs above the minimum tax threshold, and so it doesn't necessarily apply to them. And I think the other problem is that in Bath particularly, there's a very strong, message that tuition fees has completely, ruined our lives because Bath is expensive anyway, and so look at how much debt we're going to be in when we leave Bath. So, I think the fact that it's a very local issue of expensive housing, expensive nightlife, things like that, it definitely plays into the hands of the Tories.
Well, let's just have a little... Go on, Ben.
No. I was just going to say, I just wanted to know what happened to the Green surge with students as well, because I'm meeting less and less Green voters as it goes along, as it gets closer to the election. And I just think it's an interesting point that maybe, students have moved away from what the big Green value thing was, vote for us for principles, vote for us for values. Well, I think people are now actually saying, I need a little bit more than just values, I need something to attach to it.
Well, Ben, Liv and Alex have all made reference to the pressure the Liberal Democrats will face from the Conservatives. So their candidate, Ben Howlett, he did well actually, put up quite a bold show, but you still think it's not enough in this area, is it?
I think that Ben did a really good job in the first part because that's his strength, the economy, the NHS. He was talking about that with a certain amount of authority and a certain amount of passion. Gets to the second half, and that's something that I found quite interesting, is that I think that this is a constituency where personality comes into it quite a lot. Yeah. Don Foster, very popular, very big personality. Steve Bradley as well, big personality. I think that's something that a lot of people will see from him, whether they like it or not. Ben, in the second bit, which was on immigration and climate change, he had the opportunity to come forward with a little bit more passion. Steve Bradley said climate change is the biggest threat to human beings right now. Dominic Tristan, the Green candidate, big passion, very passionate on that. And of course, on immigration, you had Julian Deverell, the UKIP candidate, talking very passionately. Ben didn't really show any of that. He was sitting there for a lot of it, not saying anything. And when he was asked, it was very kind of droll and very party line. And I think that's where he lost out to Steve Bradley, is not showing that he is a personality.
But the problem is that students are historically and well known to be quite an apathetic voting group. And so I think if you come from the position that students are apathetic, and that's not to say that all students are, but if they are, then they're not going to look beyond the surface, policies, the thing that appeal to them most. And personality is a big part of that. And I think, like Ben said, Ben Howlett does not show as much vigour and passion as the others do. I mean, I wouldn't say that Dominic Tristram could necessarily be called the most charismatic politician, but
in immigration, the answer you gave in immigration, where he kind of said,
and you got a round
talked
of
about
applause.
The hate narrative, it was a very, very nice sentiment that he made, very passionate.
Ben is the friendly face of the Tories. I think he would be constrained by his party in a big way. He seems to campaign on the left of the party on issues like gay marriage and on the environment. The one sticking point Ben appears to have had is a statement he made in favour of fox hunting and game hunting, which he apparently came out in favour of, but has been tracking back on that ever since. So I think it's a bit of a front he might put up, and certainly if he was ever elected into a government, this nice friendly agenda he's pushing, I think would be steamrollered by the National Party.
Something, where is he talking? He was talking in front of students. And so to talk about the gay marriage and talk about climate change, there is an element of that perhaps, and the same could be said for Steve Bradley as well, of course. It's about who you're talking to. You don't know what they say about students when we're not in the room. So.
And just a quick word on the Greens to finish. Obviously, the Greens are renowned for having quite a good student base in Bath and around the country. Dominic Tristan, impressed?
If I'm honest, I'm not particularly impressed by him. I think I guess it goes down to what your impression of what politicians should be like. There's an element of lack of confidence he had, especially on a lot of the economic questions at the big debates. And that, again, goes back to this idea that people are starting to attach the need for more kind of content to the Greens. And Dominic is very passionate about the issues he does. He goes to a lot of marches. He's a very good member of the local community. But whether or not that has much else to it is difficult to say.
Liv, do you see the Greens of still having quite a good vote here? They'll get quite a few student votes, or?
Less and less so as we actually get closer to the election. A couple of months out from the election, back in sort of the beginning of the academic year in October, November, I thought, yeah, they stand a good chance. But I think as it's gone on, I think Dominic Tristram particularly comes across as very laid back, you know, just a normal guy, which is good, but people want a leader. That's what politicians are about, and I don't think that he brings that to the table. I don't think you can sit there and confidently say, yes, Dominic Tristram will make a strong leader. He'll push for issues, and I think that might be his weakness going forward.
Yeah, I think in Bath, a lot of the potential Green voters were disaffected Lib Dems, and in my eyes, as the campaign has built up, the Lib Dem campaigning has actually been quite effective in pulling voters back in. You're going to have a lot of reluctant students voting Lib Dem, I think.
It's going to be a very dirty tick, I think.
It will, yeah, a scribble. On Dom, yeah, I'd echo what these guys said. He's subdued and quite thoughtful. And when you contrast that to the bolshiness of Steve Bradley or Julian's passion on the issues on which he campaigns, Dominic tends to fade into the background. But the substance of what he says is sincere, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how the Green vote changes in the next 5-10 years.
So let's just go on, man.
No, sorry to keep him doing that. I think the kind of impression I get from him is he's a fantastic community leader, knows the community very well, but he just won't be able to translate that to Westminster.
He's more of a councillor than an MP.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a governor of the hospital, which is what he is.
Or leader of the council.
I think that's where, he doesn't belong in Westminster.
No.
But then this is about the culture of Westminster, you know, where so many people profess their hatred for our politics, yet refuse to vote for anything different.
And the Greens have always stood in that. If you look at Caroline Lucas or Natalie Bennett, they're very, very different from the Westminster personality.
Yeah, so especially amongst students, they'll say they hate the politician-y type and then vote for Steve Bradley.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
So Ben's already said 2,000, 3,000 majority he sees here. Would you two agree with that? Liberal Democrats will hold on to the majority here?
I'd say so.
Yeah, I would put money on it. I just think that I would.
Get your wallet out, let's go.
No, I wonder what the odds are. No, I think Liberal Democrats are going to take it, partly because there's a certain amount of stigma amongst younger voters about voting Tory, and I think very much the older generations within Bath are still very much in the centre.
And the complete lack of presence from Labour in Bath, I think, helps to unify this left-wing vote around the Lib Dems.
Yeah, I think it's a Bath culture. It's a kind of liberal middle class kind of culture in Bath. Yeah, exactly. And so they're not going to necessarily vote Conservative. So I think, and as you say, Labour's been weak in this constituency, so they're just going to stay where they are.
Although I would definitely say that going forward, it's unfortunate that Ollie Middleton has started off his political career in Bath, where he's very young and he basically stood no chance. But I definitely see him being quite big in politics going forward.
I imagine the Liberal Democrats are very happy that a candidate like Ollie Middleton was put here.
Yeah.
So there you go. Bath remains yellow according to our panel. So let's now move on to the general election. David Cameron or Ed Miliband. That's the opportunity for voters to see who will go into number 10 on May the 7th. So why don't we start about the Conservatives first. They are the favourites to win the most seats in this election, but the old adage of no one is going to win a majority. Do you see the Conservatives having the opportunity to form a minority government?
Well, yeah, I think if there's one thing everyone agrees on, it's that no majority government's going to be formed. And if anyone who saw the leaders' debate last week, the opposition leaders were basically taking it in turns to confirm that they wouldn't prop up a Tory government. The only real potential coalition partners for the Conservatives are the Lib Dems and UKIP on either side of the party. And I don't think either of them are going to win enough seats to top up the Conservatives to a majority. I agree with you that they'll probably win the most seats. So a Conservative minority government would be where my money goes.
What about you, Liv?
I definitely think the Tories are going to get the most votes. I think that they have done quite a good job in isolating a lot of the other parties. I think Europe is a very divisive issue, and basically the only party that solidly backs them is UKIP. And realistically, I don't think UKIP are going to get enough seats to play a good role in joining a coalition, and I don't think the Tories would want to be allied with them. And I think the other problem is that Labour has massively taken a hit in Scotland because SNP, if you look at all the polls, are sweeping the board. Yeah. And so I think that their previous chances of maybe getting the most seats are decimated.
Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives have done an absolutely fantastic job at, almost a negative job at making sure that A, Labour doesn't look credible under Ed Miliband, and B, that if Ed Miliband did win and went into a coalition with the SNP, they would instantly start on a very unpopular footing. And so I think that the Conservatives will win the most amount of seats. I honestly don't think it's going to be a very tidy settlement, whatever happens after that.
No.
And the Conservatives have campaigned really hard to ally the Labour with the SNP. I mean, there are considerable differences in their policy views on nuclear weapons, for example, but the one ace that the Tories have up their sleeve is being to equate a vote for Labour with the SNP, a breakup of the United Kingdom, I'd say.
And also the big thing for me, the Conservatives, the long-term economic plan. We'll say Bill Clinton, it's the economy stupid. Is it the economy that is really the thing that's going to win in this election?
Well, the last 5 years have basically been a story of economic hardship, and statistically we're now seeing recovery. So the Tories campaign around the economy well, but what they have done recently, especially with the launch of their manifesto, is mirrored some of Labour's policy on the NHS, on healthcare, where Labour are traditionally seen as stronger. The Conservatives have now come out and pledged billions extra.
8 billion.
8 billion.
8 billion extra to the NHS. So they're taking Labour on at their own game, but the economy does remain their strongest issue.
I would agree. I mean, I think the other problem, like I said, is Europe. I think Tories notoriously have some very outspoken Eurosceptics. And I think that going forward, that is going to be a slight downer. I think, they say, it's all about the long-term economic plan. We want to get people off welfare, that kind of thing. But I think realistically, there are a lot of people out there who see economic growth as being tied to the European Union.
They've kicked that issue into the long grass. They've said vote for us and we'll decide after the election.
Well, they've guaranteed a referendum.
In 2017.
Yeah.
So where, UKIP, Labour and the Lib Dems all have really clear stances on Europe, I think the Conservatives are just playing an electoral game with it. David Cameron and the leadership want to stay in the EU, but they know they've been pressured into offering the referendum.
But that was the conditions, that they have to have a majority to do the referendum, wasn't it? Which is, very kind of sneaky, trying to make sure that people take away a few votes away from UKIP, which is one of their big worries. But no, I think the economy point is absolutely what they're trying to do. The £8 billion ploy against Labour, who then couldn't immediately pledge £8 billion for the NHS, their key campaign issue. Yeah. That was very clever from the Conservatives, and yeah.
But in return, we've also seen Labour trying to take on the Tories at their own game. They've come out and said we're going to continue with austerity, cut the deficit year on year.
That's what I really enjoyed about the NHS pledge, is when the Tories said £8 billion for the NHS, Labour then turned to them and said, but you can't cost that, which has of course been one of the main criticisms the Conservatives have used against Labour.
But I mean, I think the whole costing manifestos has been, at every manifesto launch, there has been someone from some party turning around and saying, but you can't cost that pledge.
And they've all said as well, when they've held up the manifestos, the fully costed manifesto, including the Greens. So,
but this election's unique in that I think the manifestos count for nothing.
No,
We're going to be building coalitions, there's going to be compromises, and unfortunately all the main parties seem to refuse to tell us what they're going to negotiate on in their manifestos, as they think it's going to harm their chances of a majority. So manifesto promises should be definitely taken with a pinch of salt.
Although I do think it's interesting that Trident has emerged as such a strong manifesto point. It's always big. Nuclear is always going to be big. Yeah. But I've heard it mentioned more than I heard it mentioned at the last general election.
My understanding is that is a big...
Well, it's because it's coming up for renewal.
And it's coming up, and it's a big SNP policy. Yeah. And so it's just another way for the Conservatives to make the SNP look a little bit silly, people like making it seem like they are handing over Britain's sovereignty to Russia, whatever it is. So it's a clever play.
Then I think it's the SNP's main way of differentiating themselves from Labour as well, because the SNP campaign along a Labour line on so many areas that Scottish voters might just think, well, why don't I vote Labour, to build a bigger Labour majority. So the SNP have gone after Trident so hard to really pitch to voters that you can make a difference by voting SNP, however, we'll still work with Labour if you do so.
Do you think a Labour-SNP coalition is possible? Liv's already talked about the 40 seats, possibly that Labour could lose the SNP. Ed Miliband said, no, I don't want to do a deal, but after an election, it could all change.
Yeah, I guess it's possible. You know, it's perfectly feasible for Labour and SNP to get over the majority of 325. But they both seem to have ruled out a coalition with each other. So I don't think that's going to happen.
But I think going in, parties' default position is to rule out coalitions because they want to campaign on the promise that they can get the majority. And so I think, yes, now they'll say, you know, Labour says, oh, we will never go into coalition with the SNP. But if it comes down to it and they have an opportunity to form a minority government, I don't see them turning that down.
But I think as well, Nicola Sturgeon, she has grown into this almost iconic figure for Scotland now.
Yeah.
And before the debate, the first big debate with all of the party leaders, she was put down as the most dangerous woman in Britain.
Yeah.
The next day, we woke up and she was one of the most popular women in Britain. And so I think from that, Labour has probably, or should probably be trying to make sure that she's kept as this kind of popular figure, so that if they did turn around and form a coalition, that wouldn't be as surprising or as unpopular.
Although she wouldn't be leading it because she's First Minister of Scotland.
Yes, would she not be able to be deputy?
She's not even running for Westminster.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be able to be deputy prime minister?
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, and I think what's interesting, the only party who are actively marketing themselves as coalition partners are the Lib Dems. You know, they're saying we'll moderate the Tories from the left and Labour from the right. So, you know, on one hand, it's easy to see a moderating force as good, you know, so on to avoid the country radically changing. But then at the same time, it begs the question, what do they believe in? What are they standing for?
It's been a very unambitious campaign from Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think they're realistic about their promises.
And that's it. They don't want to make any pledges, and I think that's been such an interesting thing. Is so when you're making an £8 billion pledge for healthcare from the Conservatives, they're pledging, I think it was £1 billion for mental healthcare.
Yeah.
Now, you know, they are realistic. They're saying things which are both popular and relatively affordable.
But I think they've learnt from their previous mistakes in 2010 when they made a lot of radical promises, like we will cut tuition fees, which even looking back now, even as a bitter student who would have liked that, I think that looking back that would have been a pretty large move, and I think that they have learnt a couple of very hard learnt lessons.
So that would be quite interesting if the SNP did go into a coalition with Labour, they've made such big promises. If the same thing happened to the SNP in 5 years' time, they might have had to break all of their promises. And on the Lib Dems, I agree with you, to the extent where I think if they really want to reinvent themselves, Clegg's got to go, because he is now instantly associated with the tuition fees backtrack and being David Cameron's assistant.
But also his seat in Sheffield is incredibly marginal.
Yeah.
I mean, he is, from what I've heard, even in danger of losing his own seat.
Yeah.
Just a very quick word on UKIP. The Farage bandwagon, it looks like it's struggling in Thanet now, in his own prospective seat.
Well, he said that he's going to step down if he doesn't win Thanet, which I think will be a disaster for UKIP. They are a party who has been launched off this one personality. I can't think of another personality within UKIP who isn't a kind of joke or a media joke in that kind of way. And so, yes, I think UKIP will get their 10% of the vote, or maybe a little bit more. They won't get any seats, perhaps. They might even lose the two they've already got, by the sounds of things. So I don't think it's going to be a great day for UKIP.
Yeah, the bubble seems to have burst. But then this goes to show, in my opinion, the fact that UKIP's lack of resources and popular support are coming back to bite them. But also the issues around which they've campaigned have really been targeted at their core support. You know, Farage's statement about HIV in the leaders' debate, which was extremely controversial, and alienated a lot of people who would have never voted for him anyway. But I actually think that message probably resonated with his core support. So rather than trying to ambitiously claw votes from all sides and win 10, 15 seats, I think they're just consolidating their core vote of 5 seats.
So let's go to decision time, May the 7th. Is it David Cameron walking through number 10?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there we go. Bath remains yellow and David Cameron will remain as Prime Minister. That's what our experts think. Thanks for watching, and please remember to vote on May the 7th. Your vote will count and it's important you do. Thank you and goodbye.